Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call tonight's meeting of the Board of Education to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Before we get to the superintendent's report, since Secretary Wheeler is unable to attend tonight, we do need to name a temporary secretary.
I will nominate Monica Del Castillo for secretary just for this meeting.
And I will second that.
Okay. Any other nominations? All right. All in favor of Trustee Del Castillo serving as secretary for this meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much. Superintendent Cook.
Thank you, President Palvarento. Just a few things this evening. First of all, I'd like to thank the high school staff, students, and volunteers for a successful homecoming back on September 30th, a week ago Friday. We actually had, I believe, our largest crowd at the stadium for homecoming in several years. So thanks to all the community and staff and everybody that worked really hard to make that a successful event for not only our students but our community. And then I'd also like to thank the Foundation for Hazlet Schools for hosting the Meet the Candidates Forum last week, October 5th. Thanks to all the work that they did putting that together. Also thanks to Michelle Gustafson for her work in putting the program together. It was really a great event, good opportunity for all of our candidates to be introduced. And it was also taped, and so if you wanted to watch it, it's out on our YouTube channel for viewing if you didn't get a chance to be at the event. It'll be out there until the election. And then lastly, October is designated as Principals Month, so I'd like to take this time to thank all of our principals and our administrative staff for all the great work that they do each and every day for our kids. So thanks to all our principals. And then lastly, I would like to just take a moment to give Mr. Jensen a chance to answer the two questions with regard to the paving project that came up last meeting. We are going to be voting that. I believe it's an action item this meeting, but we had a question with regard to the aggregate and also the timeline. So, Rick, if you could.
Yeah. So there was a question was brought up at the last meeting regarding the different types of asphalt that were being used by the two different companies that bid. And I did speak to the gentleman that we recommended for the repaving, and he stated that the two different types is one has more aggregate in it, which is more stone. And he did say that neither is more durable. They're both just as durable and will last just as long. It's just personal preference between which ones I use. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then the other question was regards to weather and because it's getting colder or whatever. And he said as long as the temperature is above 50 degrees, that it has no effect on the paving. So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of those.
Thanks, Rick.
Any questions either for Mr. Jensen or Superintendent Cook? Okay. So our first discussion item, actually our only discussion item this evening, is the 2021-22 district audit presentation by Mr. Nick West. So welcome.
All right. Can you guys hear me all right? Perfect. All right. Thank you very much. For those who I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet, my name is Nick West. I am a manager in the audit practice at Manor Costerison. I'll be going over the fiscal year 22 audit and financial statements. So, do I got to turn it on? Yep, that would help. Perfect. So just very briefly on who we are, Manor Costerison. We're a CPA firm based out of here in Lansing, Michigan, about 140, 150 people strong. We're very invested in education and helping schools. So about 50 staff, or about a third of our firm, works solely on education audits from about May to October. And we perform about over 100, I think it's about 115 audits annually this year. So. Moving on to the financial statement. So the very first thing you will find in your financial statement is the auditor's report. And in there, we state an unmodified or a clean opinion for Hazlet Public Schools, which is the highest opinion that we can provide as your independent auditors. This is consistent with opinions in years past as well. So kudos to the district on a clean audit this year. Next in the statement, you will find the management's discussion and analysis, or MD&A. This is what it's shortened to. That's essentially your Reader's Digest version of the statement. So if you don't want to read all 70, 80 pages, I encourage you to read the 10 pages or so of the MD&A. That'll give you all the good information you really need to know throughout the year. So in there, we do have some numbers such as we talk about student count. We do some percentages in there. We talk about comparative information. That's the only part of the statement you'll find comparative information as well. And then there's also at the very end a paragraph talking about factors bearing on the district's future that the district has written. Talks a lot about maybe some federal, some state funding in there. So I encourage you all to read that as well when you have time. So what's new for fiscal year 2022? From an accounting side, GASB 87, which was the lease standard, was effective for this year. For Hazlet Public Schools, this did not have a material impact on your financial statements, so essentially none of your numbers changed, but the district did implement this standard. So going forward, any new leases that the district enters into will have to take into account GASB 87. Essentially all it does is on your government-wide financial statements, you add a capital asset and you add some liabilities there. So fund level will not change very much. The other thing that was, I would say new, but we had it last year. There were some new fundings as well, though, for ESSER. There was the ARP funding as well as the 11T. Those kind of came in. There was ESSER 1, ESSER 2 last year as well. The district did spend all of its ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 allocation this year, but there is still quite a bit left of the ESSER 3 ARP and the 11T going forward. The district did spend about $1.75 million worth of ESSER funds this year. To give you some context to that number, just 2 years ago, all federal spending by the district was under $750,000. So just in about 2 years, over doubled that just in the ESSER funds. You'll see later in the presentation too, the district spent about $3.5 million worth of federal funds this year. So almost 5-7 time increase in just about 2 years. Moving forward, this is a statement of net position, or the government-wide financial statements. This is a bit different than the fund level that you're used to. It includes capital assets, long-term liabilities. Point out at the very bottom, the total net position there, it says about a negative $42 million. I like to point that out because it's a big number and it scares people seeing it being negative, right? Well, essentially why that number is negative is the district is required to put its pension and OPEB liabilities on its books. These are state funded liabilities. So at the state level, the district has no control over these liabilities, but you're required to put your proportionate share on your books. So if you factor out about the $40.2 million for the pension, the $2.5 million for the OPEB, the district would have a positive net position. And just to give you some context as well, about 99% of districts in the state of Michigan have a large negative net position. So this is not unique to Hazlet. Some highlights in the statement of net position. The district did increase its net position, net investment in capital assets by about $300,000. Essentially what that tells us is the district is paying off its debt quicker than its assets are depreciating, which is always a great sign to see. Additionally, the district did pay off about $2.6 million worth of debt this year, and the pension and OPEB liabilities did increase significantly, which is good, but I will give some context to that. That number is measured as of 9/30/2021, which is the state's year end, since they are state liabilities. If you can remember all the way back to a year ago, the stock market was actually doing pretty well back then, so returns were doing well, so liability went down. Next year when I give this presentation, I think I'm going to tell you the exact opposite happened. Those liabilities will probably increase significantly. Moving on to the balance sheet for the governmental funds, the district did have 3 major funds this year: the general fund, the 18 capital projects fund, and the sinking fund. In the general fund, there's about $8.6 million worth of assets as of June 30, 2022. The capital projects fund was spent out this year. If you remember, that was issued about 3-4 years ago, and those have slowly been being spent throughout the year. And as such, you'll see the sinking fund there had a net deficit essentially this year, about $355,000. What happened there is as that capital projects funds got spent out, there were still some projects going on, and so the sinking fund covered some of those costs this year. So I anticipate that fund balance reversing in the next year or two and going back to positive. So moving on to the statements of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. The district did have about $35.2 million worth of revenue in its general fund, about $34.8 million worth of expenditures, which gets you down to adding to fund balance of about $415,000 this year. So that left you at fund balance of about slightly over $3.1 million, or about 9% of expenditures. To give you some context on that number there, the 2020-21 statewide average, because the 2022 numbers aren't out yet, there's still some audits going on, was about 18.5%. The Ingham ISD average was about 14.6. That statewide average is inflated. There's some small school districts that have some pretty high fund balance there. So Ingham gives you a bit of a better idea there. Hazlitt had about 8% as of last year, slightly under 9 this year. And also with that 9% number, again, this is as of expenditures. You'll see in my next couple slides how drastically expenditures have increased over the past couple of years with all the ESSER funds. If you were to factor out kind of all the additional ESSER funds and just calculate that number on a normal kind of year, we haven't really had a normal year in school finance in 2 or 3 years, right? But if you were to try and factor all that out, the number would be about 10.5%. So kind of right there in that MSBO average there. And if you can remember all the way back to 2020, the district had about 5.5% worth of fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. So almost just in 2 years, the district has doubled its fund balance percentage. Moving on, this chart here shows us kind of revenues for the general fund. Biggest thing here, that big orange square there, 72% of the district's funding comes from the state of Michigan. I'd like to just point that out because the past 2 years have been very good for the state of Michigan's budget, for the foundation allowance, been lots of revenue increases. Just something to kind of look out for in the next couple of years, maybe a change in politics, maybe a change in the economic environment. So any big changes in statewide funding are drastically going to affect school districts because that's the vast majority of the district's funding. If you look at a 3-year trend, oh, I think my numbers got flipped somehow there. I don't know how that happened. Essentially, though, the 2020 number should be the 2022. And essentially, the biggest takeaway from this chart, though, the gray box there is your federal funding. And so the district's federal funding has increased significantly, as I mentioned before, due to all those additional ESSER funds. Just a reminder, those are one-time funds. Once those funds are spent, we'll not be getting another allocation of those. So just something to be aware of with those funds as well. Expenditure-wise, about 52% of the district's expenditures come from the general fund and instruction. About 44% come out of support. Just a context with those numbers, statewide average probably about 55-ish%. Although I will say for fiscal year 2022, I anticipate that number decreasing to probably around the 50-52% range. I think you're right about average there in that mix because all of those additional ESSER funds are going to show up in your support function with all maybe the different laptops, some of the different support as you brought students back into the classroom. And then same thing, this chart got flipped again too. I looked at that earlier, I'm not quite sure, I apologize for that. But again, 2020 all the way on the right there, that will be 2022 actually. And the biggest takeaway here again is just the large increase in expenditures, especially in that support function in the orange. And again, primarily due to your ESSER funds. Keep harping over the ESSER funds, but that really is the biggest takeaway. That's really what's driven a lot of school finance over the past year or two is all that additional funding. Moving on to the notes of the financial statements in note 1, we do audit your bond expenditures in accordance with section 1351A. So essentially there we're making sure that the bond expenditures are being spent according to how the voters approved in the bond millage. Happy to state no instances of noncompliance, everything looked good there. All internal controls are being followed as well. Same with the sinking fund. There are some rules according to how you can spend those funds as well. Happy to note no instances of noncompliance for the district there. Then note 3, 6, and 8, just some other notes if you, on your leisure, feel like reading through those, provide some more good detail for the district. Looking at the budget comparison for the general fund, as in years past, the district did budget a net neutral or a balanced budget for the original and final budget. The actual budget came in, as I mentioned before, positive about $415,000. If you remember, the district does typically budget a contingency fund in there for 2022. That was about $300,000, and the district did not have to use any of that contingency fund this year. So that was where the majority of the large increase in fund balance came this year. So, and again, to give you some context, the revenues and expenditures, those budgets were both below about 5%. So the variance between the final and the actual, that's very good budgeting by Rick over there. Most school districts, I would say, probably are usually about higher than 5%. So kudos to Rick and the business office and the administration team on putting together a good budget for you. The district was subject to a single audit this year, as it was last year. This is a bit new for the district. Typically, you have to have a single audit if you spend over $750,000. So last year was the first year. This year is the second year we've had to do some. spent about $3.5 million. We did test the child nutrition cluster, which is your school and lunch program, as well as your ESSER funds. Happy to note no instances of noncompliance, no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies. So those funds were being spent how the federal government said that they should have been spent, which again is a big accomplishment because a lot of that funding came out and there was not any guidance really as to how you can spend that. So again, kudos to the district on trying to navigate the murky waters there and figuring out how to stay in compliance with the feds. And then I just like to point out too, at the very bottom, we have a line there that says auditee qualified as a low-risk auditee, and that box is checked no for the district. To give some clarity there, the district has to be subject to single audit for 2 years in a row with no material weaknesses or no findings in order to be considered a low-risk auditee. So for Hazlitt, for fiscal year 2023, you will be a low-risk auditee. Essentially what that means is as the auditor, if you're high risk, I just need to test more of your expenditures. So that's why this year I had to test the child nutrition and the ESSER program to get enough coverage. Next year, I imagine I'll probably just end up having to test the ESSER funds. And wrapping up here, we did issue a governance letter to the Board of Education. In there, we would state any uncorrected misstatements, any disagreements with management. Happy to note no instances of that sort. Very boilerplate governance letter, exactly what you want to see. Did not issue a management letter. And then finally, just going on for fiscal year 2023, there is a new GASB again, because I love rolling those out. There is a subscription-based information technology, or GASB 96. Essentially, any online curriculum, textbooks, probably accounting software, any of those sort of subscriptions, essentially, you may have to put on your books if they're material. I do anticipate that one being a bit more material than the lease one for your district and most districts in general. So really, what does that mean for the district? Throughout fiscal year 23, the district will kind of compile all these different arrangements and kind of process them, and when we come out for our preliminary audit in May next year, we'll kind of sit down with the district and determine if that will have a material impact on your financial statements or not. If it does, what does that mean? Essentially, on your government-wide financials, you'll have a new asset and you'll have a new liability, essentially, but won't affect the fund level. So, and really, that was all I had, so I just wanted to say thank you for having me here today. Appreciate all of Rick and the business office hard work throughout the audit. I think Hazlitt's the second school I do, like 2 or 3 weeks typically after year end, which is a very quick turnaround. We come out, Rick always has the numbers in great shape, and his business office is always great to work with, so really do appreciate all of their help. And yeah, with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
As you mentioned, so we've spent out our ESSER 1 and 2 funds, and we're currently spending ESSER 3 funds. And can you remind us how long we have to spend the rest of the ESSER 3 funds?
Yep, so you have all the way until fiscal year 2025. So those funds end September 30, 2024. So you can't spend them all the way through fiscal year 2025. You just have 3 months there to spend it. I anticipate most districts probably spending that through the fiscal year 2024 and then being done there. But you do have a couple extra months there if for some reason you would need that. And those funds are a bit more harder to spend. The 11T, you have the Fed really gave some strict guidelines as to how those can be spent. So I do anticipate some districts running into some difficulties trying to spend all that. Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate the overview, and I know you spent some time with the Finance Committee, and I was just curious if there were any other questions that came up or any issues that were highlighted that didn't get addressed. Was it pretty much the same presentation? Okay, there we go.
I would say, yeah, I
Thank you.
think I went for about maybe 20 minutes, a half hour at the finance. I tried to keep it a little bit shorter for you guys. I went through probably about most of the 80 pages with the finance, tried to keep it to the MD&A Reader's Digest version for you tonight.
Yeah, we go a little more in depth, and we didn't have the nice charts that help give a visual.
Yep.
It definitely helps me as a visual learner.
Yep.
So I know you mentioned that we've, 5 times of the federal funds, mostly due to ESSER. Can you talk a little bit about those non-ESSER federal funds? So kind of what we had beforehand and how that funding, has it stayed flat or has that increased as well? Mm-hmm. Because that's what we're going to be looking at in a few years is what we probably go back to.
Yep, absolutely. So the district does get their typical title allocation. That has decreased over the years for some districts. The other big federal expenditure and revenue the district had was the school lunch program. Essentially, for fiscal year 21 and 22, all of your meals were provided free to the students. Going forward to fiscal year 2023, that is not happening. And the Fed was reimbursing the district at the free level, which was significantly higher than what you're going to get at the paid level. So I anticipate the federal expenditures decreasing significantly over the next year or two. So next year, I don't anticipate 3.5. I do still anticipate quite a bit with some of those ESSER funds being spent out, though. But yep, those are your, between the title, the ESSER, and then the child nutrition, those are kind of your biggest federal funding sources.
Treasurer Collins, anything you want to add, since you guys talked about this a little bit more at committee meeting, or?
Well, I'll just add that we did go more in depth over the 80 pages, and also I spoke with Nick this summer as well about the preliminary audit, so we went over that over the summer, so this just kind of follows through on all of that, and it's all good news, so.
Mr. Jensen, Mr. Cook, anything you want to add?
No, I just want to say thanks again to Rick and his staff, but also to Nick, because their firm does a great job. We've been working with them for many, many years, and they make it really easy, and they really do assist us throughout the year when we have questions, especially with the ESSER funds and things that have come up in the last couple of years. There's been a lot of very difficult issues to navigate, so Nick and his team do a really good job. So thank you and your firm for all the work that you do for us.
Yeah, absolutely. We try to make the auditing as painless as auditing possibly can. I don't know if it really can ever be painless, but
so one of the questions that comes up with regard to the unfunded liability at the pension level, you know, there was a few years ago they had a plan to pay that off a certain period of time. Are we seeing the end of that or the end of the horizon with regard to that anytime soon? What's your?
They still say, I believe it's 2035 or 2036, I think is what they say. I'm not optimistic. The OPEB liability has been decreasing significantly, but that's primarily due to them shifting more resources to paying down that OPEB liability compared to the pension.
Can you explain the difference between those two? Because OPEB, some folks might not.
So the OPEB, or other post-employment benefit, it's essentially the healthcare portion of the teachers and the district's retirement, essentially there. So you got the pension piece for your actual retirement, and then they also get the healthcare portion as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish I had better news on that. Well, we need, I think the plan had about 26% investment return for fiscal year that I just showed you there. If we can get that for 5-10 years in a row, I think we might be on the right track, but we'll see.
Any further questions? Yeah, it's those unfunded liabilities as a district we know show up on our books that we have no control over that are always difficult to try to explain. So I appreciate you giving that explanation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I did have one other question since we're talking about that. Because there was a time period where teachers switched and that there is no pension anymore unless you were paying into it or electing to pay for your health care going forward. Does that kick in at a certain point where that might?
So that is factored into there right now. There is, I believe it's the Pension Plus 2 program, I think is the newest one where there's Part DB, and so defined benefit, which would be the pension and part of the defined contribution. So that is all factored into there. I know rates, they've been increasing retirement rates significantly. Rick can probably tell, was it probably over 40, 50% now in total? Yeah, total. Yeah. So if you think about for every dollar someone makes, 50 cents of that the district is paying towards their retirement and their OPEB liability there. So they're raising rates, they're trying to get to it, but it's very, very underfunded, so it's very tough.
And again, those rates that you just mentioned are set by the state, so those aren't anything that we have any control over.
Yep. They're online. Anyone can feel free to look at them. They're very high now, though.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for all of your work. I know that it's something that Mr. Jensen and Rick, or Steve, as they've said, they've always talked about how great it is to work with you, and we always appreciate you coming to this meeting and explaining the findings to us. So,
absolutely. My contact information is up there, so if anybody has any follow-up questions or need anything, feel free to reach out.
thank you.
Yep, thank you.
So next on our agenda is correspondence. So, Trustee Del Castillo.
We have no correspondence.
Thank you. Next, we have comments from the public. So just as a reminder, everybody is welcome to come up and speak. It is a 5-minute time limit. We ask that you introduce yourself and that the comments are addressed to the board. So anybody who is interested in speaking may come up and just say hi. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Ashley. My daughter attends Hazlitt Middle School. She is new to the schools this year, and she has had a lot of bullying since she started. Within the first couple weeks, she was assaulted 4 times. And when I tried to talk to the principal and the bus garage about it, it just kind of got dismissed. As in they were handling it, but it's confidential. They can't tell me what's being done or if the other students, because it's all confidential. But the other students were still in school. They were still riding the bus, and every time Bella told on them, the bullying got worse. And the principal continued to tell me that it was confidential, that it was being handled. And one of the assaults were on camera on the bus, and I pressed charges on that one. And when I talked to the bus garage, because they weren't kicked off the bus, they were still on the bus the next day, and I called up there to ask like what was going on there, and my child was given an assigned seat away from her friends and isolated by herself, and the ones that assaulted her didn't get assigned seats or a pink slip or expelled or suspended, nothing. And so then it got to a point where Bella didn't want to go to the teachers or anybody for when she was assaulted because it just got worse for her and nothing happened to them. And when I tried to talk to the principal about it, she said that it was being handled, and then I told her that if Bella was being assaulted again, that I informed Bella that she was to defend herself because she's been assaulted 4 different times and nothing's happened. And she was very quick to snap and tell Bella with her finger in her face that if she laid her hand on another student, she would be suspended, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And Bella started crying. She was like, I don't understand that if I defend myself, that I'm suspended, but nothing's happening to the bullies. And still, like, nothing has happened. And I went up there on numerous occasions, and I've tried to talk to the bus garage at least about the bus situation, because the ones on the bus were high schoolers, the middle schoolers' older siblings, and about if something could be done there. And I was like, you have it on camera of the high schooler hitting her in the head. And he informed me that maybe I should take my own child to school, so solve everybody's issues. And I informed him that I go to work before school ever starts. I got to be to work by 6:30. And he said, well, it doesn't look like she was hit that hard. And I was like, it doesn't matter how hard she was hit. The point was that she was hit and nothing's been done about it. And when the principal called me back up there on one occasion about Bella was hit, and then when they tried to talk to her and calm her down, tell her to go back to class. And they got upset that Bella called me on her cell phone, and they're not supposed to have cell phones in the school. And I was like, well, the last time that she was assaulted outside, she couldn't get into the office because the bullies ran straight to the office first to call home or to do stuff, and they were smiling through the window. So Bella called me on her cell phone. And so I went up there for that, and they informed me that she wasn't allowed to have her phone, and I was like, well, she's not going to be here without a phone. It's her only way to call me. And the principal said that they were definitely doing something that the other kids had lunch detention too, because they put Bella in lunch detention for that. And they informed me that the other kids had lunch detention too, and that everything was fine. And I was like, well, with the bullying still going on every day, I'm going to go to the news. And the principal got mad right away and was like, okay, if that's what you want to do, go do it. This meeting's done. You're free to go. I was very upset. And I was like, well, that shows that obviously you know something's not right, or else you wouldn't mind it getting out. Bella came to Hazlitt because she was being bullied in Lansing schools. So I've heard a lot of good things about Hazlitt. So I thought that it would be a better situation. But at least over there she wasn't being assaulted daily. And I just think that there should be a different way about it.
Ashley, we've reached the 5 minutes, but I just wanted to let you wrap up really quick. If you-
I just think that something should definitely be done about the bullying, and that the teachers should act like they care more rather than punishing the victim.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak this evening?
Good evening, Jeff Kestner, Hazlitt resident. I don't recognize the country I've grown up in. We've become a nation that has lost its collective mind. You can't justify this insanity. When a woman speaks before Congress and says men can get pregnant, you are supposed to agree with her. People who've never owned slaves should pay slavery reparations to people who've never been slaves. People who've never been to college should pay the debts of college students who took out huge loans for their degrees. Immigrants with TB and polio are welcome, but you better be able to prove your dog is vaccinated. Irish doctors and German engineers who want to immigrate to the United States must go through a rigorous vetting process, but any gangbangers who jump the southern fence are welcome. $5 billion for border security is too expensive, but hundreds of billions of dollars to protect other countries' borders is not. If you cheat to get into college, you go to prison, but if you cheat to get into the country, you go to college for free. People who say there's no such thing as gender are demanding a female president. We see other countries going socialist and collapsing, but it seems like a great plan for us. Some people are held responsible for things that happened before they were born, and other people are not held responsible for what they are doing right now. Criminals are caught and released to hurt more people, but stopping them is bad because it's a violation of their rights. People are dying of a Chinese virus, but it's racist to refer to it as Chinese, even though it began in China. Men and women's sports is fair, but all it takes is common sense in a 5th grade biology class to realize this is unfair. And pointing out all this hypocrisy somehow makes us racist. As rioters looted, burned buildings, churches, and police stations in the summer of 2020, it was the moms, dads, and grandparents speaking to school boards who were labeled as domestic terrorists. Prayer is banned in schools, but a drag queen in every school seems like a great idea. The Hazlitt School Board says their equity plan has nothing to do with critical race theory, but the person who devised the plan is a professor teaching critical race theory. The Hazlitt School Board lectures this community about white privilege through their emails and equity plan, but those who live in glass houses should not be throwing stones. During COVID, the CDC director said the safest place for kids to be is in school, but Hazlitt had only 86 days of in-person learning compared to Charlotte at 155, Williamston 126, DeWitt 116, and St. John's at 105. Reported last month was the largest drop ever in reading and math test scores. Yet this school board has focused its attention on indoctrinating students with a Marxist ideology predicated in the claim that racism is in the DNA of American institutions and society as well as in the DNA of white Americans. During COVID, the CDC said there was a 1 in 10,000 chance of catching COVID off surfaces, but somehow it seemed like a good idea to close Hazlitt schools 1 day a week to sanitize surfaces. During COVID, Hazlitt students were denied in-person learning and suffered dramatic learning loss. We were told the science was being followed, but when faced with a loss of $500,000 of state funding, the science magically disappeared and schools reopened. We are clearly living in an upside-down world where right is wrong, wrong is right, where moral is immoral, and immoral is moral. Speak up, America. Speak up, Hazlitt. The great unsinkable ship Titanic America has hit an iceberg, it's taking on water, and it's sinking fast. Going forward, we need school board members who will actually follow the science and not deny students in-person learning based on their politics. We need a school board that will focus on educating students, not indoctrinating them with the Marxist, racist, divisive ideology of critical race theory. We need a school board that recognizes parental rights. It's the parents' rights to instill morals, values, and ideology in their children, not the school board's. And finally, students deserve to be viewed as individuals, each possessing their own individual talents. However, through its equity plan, this board separates students into groups. White students are labeled as oppressors, and students of color are labeled as oppressed. And this does not cure racism, it fans the flames of racism. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to make comments this evening? Okay, so we will move to board reports. First up is Policy and Personnel Committee, and I believe, Ms. Lemmer, you are giving the report tonight?
I am, in Mr. Byrd, Chairman Byrd's absence. We talked about, there was a presentation from Associate Principal Dobson and Principal North talking about our social emotional learning and working with an organization called Opportunity Thrives to provide some professional development. And the goal of the the mission of Opportunity Thrives is to grow resilient, emotionally strong, and high-capacity educators, which in turn will help develop the same in our student body. We actually had a similar bus garage paving update as what Mr. Jensen shared with us earlier. Superintendent Cook talked to us about the Michigan Administrative School Association, Superintendent Association conference that he attended with some professional development for him. We received a playground update, so some continuing research on different inclusive playground equipment options to make sure that we are fully meeting the needs of all of our students. And we had an update or a notice that our Neola representative is going to be introducing some potential policy updates for us. So Mr. Byrd and I will be meeting with him soon, or that representative soon. And we also had a comment from the public.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Lemmer or Ms. Tel Castillo for that meeting? All right. So next is Finance and Facilities, Treasurer Collins.
Okay, thank you. We went in depth, we had a similar agenda, but we went more in depth in the district audit. We did go through most of the 80 pages. We also had the presentation from Principal North about social emotional learning, and we got to see the schedule for the entire school year for professional development and all of the activities and subjects that were planned. We received the bus garage paving update as well, and an update on the conference that Mr. Cook attended. And then we also received the playground update and looked at all of the options that are out there. And we discussed involving all the stakeholders in deciding, which direction we're going to go in the future, continuing that work that we started in the spring, looking at that. So that was our meeting.
Okay. Any questions for Treasurer Collins or Mr. Morey for that meeting?
No question, but I actually wanted to add in reference to the playground conversation. There are some accessible playgrounds either currently existing or in development or planning stages in the greater Lansing area. So there are some conversations with some other stakeholders to, again, make sure we're finding the best possible options.
Okay, thank you.
I do have another comment in regards to that as well. So I believe Mr. Jensen was going to be looking at an accessible playground in the city of Lansing, as well as the school in Mason. And at some point here in the near future, we're going to have a formal report, as well as folks who are the professionals in that area report back on those assessments of other playgrounds, as well as our needs and so on and so forth. And there was another comment that I was going to make, and it just slipped my mind. I guess it just slipped my mind, so.
Thank you for those reports. Next is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So Superintendent Cook, Assistant Superintendent Burt.
Yes, I have nothing to report since our last meeting.
I do know that Stephanie Livingston is last week and this week is meeting with building principals to talk about what they're doing and what they might like
And I know we had the posting for the school, each school, I can't remember if it was called a coordinator or what that was going to be in each building. Have we identified who the folks are going to be in each building?
Yes, we have identified an individual in each of the buildings.
Okay. Will we be learning
Yeah,
who those folks
yes.
are soon?
During our next report, we'll put something
Okay.
together so you know.
Thank you. And then items from board members.
I did remember what I was going to say. And that had to do with a presentation on social emotional learning for our teachers. So I was very, very impressed by the work that they're doing to make sure that our teachers are in a good place. Because if our teachers are not in a good place, nobody's in a good place. And I'll speak to that as a mom. You know, if mom's not in a good place, you know, usually there are issues. So they're really doing some good work to make sure that our staff are taking care of themselves and practicing, you know, some good, healthy strategies to help them show up as their best self for our students. And so I just want to applaud the district for doing that because, yeah, we want to take care of our kids, but we also want to take care of our staff as well.
Any other items from board members?
I was just going to say congratulations to homecoming, the game, the parade, the dance, everything was a huge success, and everybody had a lot of fun, and it went off very well. It was nicely done, so congratulations.
Not this past week, but the week before, Murphy also had their fun run. It looked like the kids had a great time. They hit some great fundraising goals. I guess Mr. Hatch went around and kissed a pig in every single classroom, not just one kiss, but every classroom to make sure he met his items, his goals that he put for the kids to get. So it's always nice to see them creating some fun, different things that the kids really enjoy.
Any other items? I know we're coming up starting on conferences, and so just want to wish all of our teachers and staff good luck in these kind of long days and going over all the data that's been collected. So just hope everybody has some smooth evenings and book fairs too, so. Okay, any other items? So the next on our agenda is a personnel matter resolution. It was attachments B1 and 2 in our board meeting packets. I don't know, Superintendent Cook, if you want to.
Yeah, so as discussed in the committee meetings this last week, I'm making a recommendation for termination of one of our employees. This individual was involved in originally a felony, which was pleaded down into a misdemeanor. Part of the state law requires a notification from the district to the district when charged with such matters. We were not notified, which is a violation of our policy. Also, this individual, this is the third time of this similar incident, and so based upon prior activity and recommendation in terms of the violation of the policy, we are recommending to the board that this individual is terminated from Hazlet Public Schools. And that resolution is in the packet, so that's what we're recommending, and hopefully the board will vote on it. Any questions?
I think you had discussed that the individual would have been given, or was given an opportunity to speak to the board, and I take it that has
Correct.
been waived.
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, we never heard from the individual.
Any further questions for Superintendent Cook? With none, we would need a motion to approve the resolution as presented to the board.
I move that we approve the resolution to terminate an employee as presented to the board.
Thank you. Trustee Del Castillo.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further questions or discussion? All right. All those in favor of approving the resolution for termination of a member of our personnel, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so the motion passes. So next on our agenda is approval of the consent agenda. Hold on, let me make sure I got all the items. So first is the approval of our minutes from the September 26th regular board meeting. Second is approval of the minutes from the October 3rd Policy and Personnel Committee meeting. Third, approval of the minutes from the October 4th, 2022 Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. And then fourth is approval of repaving of the bus garage parking lot recommendation, which was made by Mr. Jensen and then given an update earlier this evening. Does anybody need any of those items pulled from the consent agenda? All right, seeing none.
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Maury.
I'll second.
Thank you, Treasurer Collins. Any further discussion? All in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the consent agenda passes. Thank you. So finally, on our agenda is announcements. There are two. The MASB Annual Leadership Conference is scheduled for October 20th through 23rd, 2022 at the Grand Traverse Resort and Spa in Acme, Michigan. Please let Michelle know if you want to register for the MASB Leadership Conference. And again, Cammie is going to be our representative, our delegate at the business meeting. And then we have a regular scheduled Board of Education meeting on October 24th, 2022 at 7 p.m. here in the Haslet Administration Building. And with that, if anybody wants to move, we adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Lummer.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Del Castillo. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.